The diabolical genius of the false decretals is that it was truth mixed with lies, and it was very elaborately done.
If you go into the 11th century, when you have Gratian and his compilation of the canons, you'll discover that in support of papal power, out of something like 330 quotations, 313 of those sources of authority come from those false, distorted documents.
The Jesuits held them back, but they finally came to view that many of these documents were forgeries, and they were forged specifically to give Rome power, and so that they would be looked upon as the true church and as the seat of the papacy, and that this was what the church had written about and what the church supported, when in fact they were all forged.
The Decretals of Isidore became the cornerstone of canon law during the Middle Ages. They would be used to deceive the church for more than 600 years, until they were finally exposed by Calvinist scholar David Blondel in 1628. But the false decretals and the donation of Constantine are said to be just two of the countless forgeries created by Rome.
They're all basically the same. They're the same as the Dictatus Papae of Gregory VII, in which they are claims made about papal power.
Pope Gregory VII was perhaps the most notorious forger ever admitted to by Catholic historians. In the 11th century, he drafted his Dictatus, or list of papal privileges. Among his 27 points, he declared the following: "The Pope can be judged by no one on earth. The Roman Church has never erred, nor can it err until the end of time. The Pope alone can dethrone emperors and kings and absolve their subjects from allegiance. And all princes are obliged to kiss his feet." To support these ideas, Gregory relied upon the forged documents of the past, but chose to go even farther and create his own history for the Church and the world. In the book Vicars of Christ, former Jesuit priest Peter de Rosa writes of Pope Gregory VII and his school of forgers. He says, "For 7 centuries, the Greeks had called Rome the home of forgeries. Whenever they tried talking with Rome, the popes brought out forged documents, which the Greeks, naturally, had never seen." De Rosa says Gregory went way beyond the donation of Constantine. He had a whole school of forgers under his very nose, turning out document after document with the papal seal of approval to cater for his every need. Pope Gregory might require justification for some action against a prince or bishop. Very well, these prelates literally produced the appropriate document. No need for research, it was all done on the premises. Many earlier documents were touched up to make them say the opposite of what they said originally. Is it possible that the reason Codex Vaticanus has a strange and even newer appearance is that it may not be a truly ancient manuscript? The earliest recorded date for Vaticanus is 1475 AD, when it was first entered into the record of the Vatican Library. The manuscript had formerly been rejected by Erasmus and the Reformers because they believed it was corrupt. Yet somehow, the warnings of the Reformation were completely ignored by Tischendorf and the scholars who supported him. They all embraced Vaticanus without questioning its authenticity or considering that it may have been one of Rome's many historic forgeries. Among this company of scholars was F.H.A. Scrivener, another prominent academic who also opposed Constantine Simonides. The strange thing about all of these guys, Bradshaw, Scrivener, Tregellus, Hort, all of them who supported Codex Vaticanus and who questioned Constantine Simonides. It's understandable that they would question Simonides because he had been accused of forgery. That makes sense, that they would take the time to investigate his claims. But why they did not apply the same standard to the Vatican, when the Vatican has a much longer and much more provable history of forgery and fakery and fraud, why they didn't apply the same standard when they were examining Codex Vaticanus just doesn't make any sense. And in fact, if you study what happened when Tregellus, for example, when he goes to the Vatican Library to examine Codex Vaticanus, the priest there behaved in a very strange manner. And he said while he was looking at the Codex, there were priests in the room, and they were making noise and so on to try and distract him. And he said that if he spent too much time looking at any one page for too long and studying it, they would come and snatch it away, almost as though they didn't want him to have an opportunity to study it too closely. Among the more startling features of Vaticanus are its many omissions.
In the Gospels alone, it leaves out 237 words, 452 clauses, and 748 whole sentences. And other manuscripts agree that those things are there.
You have to go back before that with German higher criticism, and they developed a theory called the recension theory.
The recension theory was introduced by a man named Johann Semler in the 18th century. One of his disciples, Jacob Griesbach, would popularize his theory among German intellectuals. Both Semler and Griesbach held to unorthodox views of Christianity, to say the least. Semler is known as the father of German rationalism, and he clearly influenced Griesbach. Rationalism in Germany is very much like the Enlightenment in France, where they rejected the idea of the divinity of Christ because they rejected the supernatural elements of the Bible, the virgin birth, Christ being raised from the dead, him ascending into heaven, and so on. All of that to them in France, it was unreasonable because of the reason movement. Well, in Germany, it was irrational, hence the term rationalism. So they believed it was irrational to believe those things, so they rejected them. And this was the view of both Semler and Griesbach. So Semler and Griesbach were two men who essentially rejected the gospel, and the rationalism that they were known for took hold in Germany, and Germany then became the epicenter for higher criticism against the Bible. The concentration of activity in Germany is believed to have been the working of the Jesuits, whose aim was to destroy the confidence of Protestants in the inerrancy of Scripture. This was acknowledged by Dr. Ian Paisley, who had this to say about the ongoing war waged by Rome and the Jesuits against the Bible.
And it's not the word of man, it's the word of God. Now, of course, Rome used to burn the Bibles. She used to burn the people that translated them. She used to burn the people that read them. But that didn't succeed. So she decided upon another scheme, that she would place her Jesuit priests in the training of Protestant ministers. And so into the universities of Germany, Rome set at work the whole structure of unbelieving higher criticism. And she had in the universities men who sought to destroy belief in the Bible. And we became cursed with what was known as higher criticism. And young men had their faith in the Bible destroyed in the universities and in the training colleges. And so the men that came out to be ordained didn't believe the book. They didn't believe the creeds of the church. They didn't believe in the historic Christian faith. And they set to work to destroy the faith.
With that spirit of textual criticism and non-belief in the inspiration of the Word of God, looking at the Bible just like any other book, scholars, and even, quote, Christian scholars, began to follow that line.
Textual criticism in the proper sense is not necessarily a bad thing.
Textual criticism is a word that is used to assess the value of one Greek manuscript over another. That's what it is. It's a bringing of the manuscripts together and then showing which is the one to go with and which is the one not to go with.
The practice of textual criticism began in the Middle Ages and grew out of the conflicts between Rome and the Protestant Reformation. It is most often traced to a 17th century scholar named Richard Simon.
He's the one who is alleged to have really begun this whole process. He's called the father of textual criticism. He was a French Roman Catholic priest.
You have textual criticism in the ordinary sense, which is simply a process of going through ancient manuscripts, collating them, and trying to remove any errors, and trying to figure out what the original text was and what it should be. Then you have what is known as higher criticism, which is where you give a historical analysis of the manuscripts. And then you begin to question whether or not Moses could have really written the book of Genesis, or whether Peter could have written the epistles ascribed to him. And you begin to question the authorship and the historical nature of the Bible. And this was the process that is usually traced to Richard Simon. Simon entered the priesthood in 1670. He was initially educated by Jesuit priests, and then later at the Sorbonne in Paris. He would go on to enter the congregation of the Oratory. The purpose of the Oratory was said to be to interpose a barrier to the continuous and disquieting progress of Protestantism. All of the orders that Simon was involved with, whether the Jesuits or the Sorbonne in Paris, and then the Oratory, they were all involved in variant forms of the Counter-Reformation. They were all looking for different ways to try and overthrow the Protestant movement. Yet Simon's focus was guided by the Jesuits from the beginning. It was they who laid the foundation for Simon's work through one of their original members, Alfonso Salmeron, who had joined with Ignatius Loyola in 1534. We read that Salmeron paved the way for Richard Simon. The Jesuits introduced into Catholic reading of the Bible the parameters of time, place, context, and semantic structures. The idea of applying principles of time and context don't necessarily sound like a bad thing until you realize how they were being used as weapons to try and undermine the Bible. One example was a book that was written by another Roman Catholic named Isaac La Pereire during the same era.